because you know data is the oxygen today. Sometimes, as a lay person, I may not realize that oxygen is depleting, but the moment data gets impacted,
You get
I
to know.
probably know in 2 minutes.
In the interim, what we can also do is that the Navy, the Indian Navy, can also build up some capacities and capabilities for cable repair. Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the 8th episode of WLM Dialogues. I'm once again delighted to have Admiral Shrikhande as my guest today. And today we're going to do a very topical subject, and that is regarding undersea cables. They've been in the news for the last 3 or 4 days specifically, because on the 22nd of this month, we had a report by the South China Morning Post about a new Chinese invention would be a wrong term to use, but a new Chinese, I would say, machinery that they have sort of come out with, which they say is capable of cutting undersea cables up to a depth of 4,000 meters. I mean, the world, as could be expected, exploded in a whole lot of commentary on the subject. So it's time for us to delve a little deeper on this subject. So let me talk firstly as part of the introduction on undersea cables. So traffic, of course, we know that the numbers vary from 95 to 99% of all internet traffic today is routed via undersea cables. Now these cables, they traverse long distances and they have to be laid at, from a cable landing station, traverse through very deep depths and come out at the other side. They're laid by specialized ships, which we will discuss during this podcast. But the point I'm trying to make is that while they're getting laid, they, up to a certain depth, are entrenched. So they have these plows that move along with the cable cutting ship that traverses along the seabed, and maybe up to a depth of up to 1,000 or 2,000 meters, they are embedded into the seabed, and beyond that, to save costs, they lie on the seabed. These cables also, depending on the traffic and depending on a very detailed assessment which is carried out by these cabling companies on their probability of getting damaged, they are armored up to a certain length, and thereafter they are unarmored and continue that way. Now, when they are laid, they tend to be, they're taut, obviously, because there's a tensioner to make sure that they're laid out straight. In case they have a problem, they have to be pulled out. And if you're pulling out cables from deeper depths, you don't have that much slack. So the normal trend that is followed is to cut the cable and then to pull out the ends, carry out the repairs, put in a bight, an extra length of cable to reconnect them, splice it at both ends, and lower it back into the water. The point I'm trying to make is cable cutters are required for routine repairs of cables in deep waters. So the assumption for all of us to jump to that, this is against, it is primarily an instrument of warfare, etc., may be a false assumption. But that being said, I mean, there is no doubt that these can be used in various sort of situations. And let me ask Admiral Shrikhande that what do you think was the motivation of the Chinese to make this announcement in the way they did?
Yes, I think it's probably one can only guess about their motivations. But what I reckon is that they meant to stir the pot in some ways, knowing the media would probably lap up, and it's possible that they've also have their influencers, so to speak, to use a current term, to carry this story. Because yes, you're right, the story really has caught fire everywhere, and this is nothing unusual that the Chinese have done. Many companies and many government agencies have similar capabilities. What is interesting is to see that it's China's deep sea mining research labs that have come up with this equipment. Right. And it may have multi functions. I would say, as you pointed out very rightly, that cable cutting is part of the repair process itself. rather than being exclusively for destructive purposes. So it's meant for repair and, you could say, constructive purposes. The second part is that from the photographs and whatever I have been able to study, the 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 ROV, remotely operated vehicle, actually seems to be multifunctional.
Right.
It could probably plant some things. It could plant listening devices. It could be used for repairs itself, but it could also be used for exploring an area. And as we know, the Chinese are really making a lot of strides across the range of submersible vehicles, which can go up to 6,000 meters or so quite easily, and they've
Right.
demonstrated that. So the Chinese are ramping up capabilities in the undersea domain very rapidly. The other aspect is that China commercially is still a major, but still, compared to Western monopolies for all aspects of undersea cables, including the manufacture of undersea cables, the ability to lay those cables, the ability to repair those cables, and the users of data and the providers of data are really four or five companies in this world. 4 or 5 major companies. Some are, one or two like Alcatel, etc., are French. Most others are American. And the Chinese, of course, have HMN and I think Fiber. I forget the name, but it's Fiber something.
Okay.
Those are the two major companies which are manufacturing cables, which are manufacturing other equipments, including transmitters, etc., which amplify the signal. So the cables themselves are a very high technology process. Nothing new about it, but every few years, I think there is a further technological improvement which is actually impinging on cable reliability. Cost of maintenance is coming down. The cost of laying is coming down. So in all this, the Chinese are trying to play catch up, and they're doing a super job. And I think in that case, we are lagging behind in India. So I would say that the Chinese have complex motivations for announcing it this way. First, in a scientific paper that was referred to by others, and then it caught fire. So as I think we discussed in an earlier broadcast, that the media should perhaps take a bit of a chill approach
Right.
to this. But
So,
what is it about sort of cables itself, where we are perhaps lagging behind? We can talk about it a little later also if you wish. But what about the competition in cable technologies? How are we doing in that?
I'm not really a technical person in this aspect. I know that we have a few companies like Phenolics, etc., which are making strides in the manufacture of cables. When it comes to cable laying, we've got zero capability. I mean, we don't have a cable laying ship. In fact, we do not have a cable repair vessel in the country. And therefore, what typically happens is that we have a large number of cable operators. We have a large number, I mean, 6 to 7, I think, the best of my knowledge, 17 to 18 international undersea cables, and 3 more being added on within the next 2 3 months, which is going to quadruple our capacity, because modern day cables have got multiple cores and can carry vastly amount of more data than what is carried in the past, and they all funnel up in around, if I have my numbers exactly right, maybe around 15 or 16 cable landing stations, which are focused in 5 or 6 different locations. The most dense is off Versova, where we have a large number of cables coming in over there, and therefore it creates a vulnerability that we have to sort of progressively address. But speaking of vulnerabilities, I mean, this cutting of cables, at least, or interruption of cables, whether advertent or inadvertent, is something that is, the number of reports have really greatly come up in the last year and a half. It's all started off with the new polar bear incident, which took place between Finland and the other side of the Gulf of Finland, that I think is Estonia, if I'm not mistaken, where you had this vessel, the new polar bear, which was actually Hong Kong registered, and on the 22nd of October 2023, She ran through this area and I think went through a couple of cables and a couple of gas pipelines also. And she showed up in St. Petersburg with one anchor missing. And these days she had her AIS on, so it was quite easy to correlate that exactly at what time the incident took place and which were the vessels around. Now, I think the Chinese have sort of admitted that they are responsible, and there is some sort of compensation which is being worked out in this particular case. But that was not the only incident. Just a few months after that, on the 17th of November 2024, not a few months, in fact, more than a year after that, on the 17th of November 2024, the Yipeng 3 had another incident between Sweden and Lithuania this time, where cables got damaged again. This was followed by the Eagle S, another ship, and all somehow strangely either China or Russia involved in some way or the other in these incidences. And after that, you had the Shunqing 39, which is off Taiwan this time, where again they had on January 3rd this year itself, there were reports of communications getting interrupted because of damage being caused by ships, whether deliberately or inadvertently is always we can only speculate in that matter. But as far as I know, this disruption of cables is not really anything new. This has been going on historically for a long time. Would you like to comment on the historical aspect of this?
Yes, yes. Certainly, it has been going on for a long time. In fact, a very long time. Perhaps you could say from the earliest decades of telegraph cables. But the point you made is very important to note that cable vulnerabilities really can impact very rapidly. Of course, the data that goes can be rerouted, but it is an impact. And some of this impact, as you mentioned, could be traced back to the American-Spanish War and the first belligerent action of the First World War happened within a few hours of Britain declaring hostilities on Germany. And I think on the 4th or 5th of August, in a very prepared, planned for action, a British telegraph mail ship, which was operated by the Royal Navy, went and grabbed and lifted up two cables, one at Hook of Holland, at Harwich, and I think somewhere close by, in where the cable landing stations were. They used to be very similar to what cable landing stations are now. And they cut them, and as a result, immediately about 60% of Germany's telegraph traffic stopped. Now, you may wonder, telegraphs carrying, birthday greetings or anniversary greetings were the big thing. They probably were a very small thing. Most financial traffic, including banking transactions, traveled on telegraph codes between continental Europe to Britain, and from there on to North America, South America, etc., which were big trading partners of Germany, and both Germany and Britain were big players in the financial world. Today, much of the data that is carried on cables includes daily banking data, stock exchanges, and it's a vital artery actually. So these cables were cut, and then periodically many cables throughout the world were cut from time to time. There was a little bit of a alternate for communicating with, especially with warships by all navies, and which was radio, which had just come in. So there are always alternatives that keep coming in, but cutting telegraph cables is nothing new. It is to be expected that more and more of this will happen in times of deep crises and conflict. But the interesting part is that there was deniability even during those years in the Spanish-American War, in the prelude to the Spanish-American War, and the incidents that you mentioned also, many of them we still do not know, because nobody is admitted to that. They are like terrorist attacks. Some of them, somebody admits, and somebody doesn't. So there's this virtue, if you can call it that, of deniability in cable cutting and disrupting digital trade, which is a huge part of our daily lives.
So you spoke about, I mean, of course, one thing that we really need to do, therefore, is that if to prepare ourselves for this, amongst many others, and we'll come to the many others right now, is that to increase our capacities. I believe that we are responsible for 20% of all internet traffic in the world, and yet we have only 2% of the world's cables which are landing in India. Uh, in fact, even Singapore has got more cables landing in their country than India has. So it is important, I would say, and it's good to see that with these three new cables coming in, I think they are the two Africa Pearls, the India Asia Express and the India Europe Express. That with this we're going to quadruple our capacity by the end of this year. But a lot more needs to be done in this, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, is that you need to have a geographic spread also of your cable landing stations, so that it gives you a lot more, I would say, you're better placed against untoward incidences that might happen. The other place where we can improve is that while internet traffic, the vast bulk of internet traffic is traversing through undersea cables, but space is beginning to play an increasingly important role. So SpaceX we all know about, and I think by last count, more than 7,000 satellites are up as part of Starlink, as part of the Starlink program. In fact, 65% of all satellites in low Earth orbit today are not owned by a country, but owned by one company, and
Yes.
that is Starlink, which is really a strange place for us to be. And also the cost differential between space-based internet and terrestrial or fiber optic based internet is diminishing quite rapidly. By one report I read just a couple of days back, they're saying that the difference now is only around 55%, so which is not too much. Also, download capacities of space-based internet are now up to around 200 to 300 Mbps, and with the aim to hit 1 Gbps, which is again coming quite close to what FO-based fiber internet can do for you. So this sort of diversification will certainly help, so that you always have multiple sort of ways and means to address any infringements or breakages that might take place. Uh, that being said, sir, I mean, there is, when it comes to these protection of undersea cables, what is the regulatory framework that has existed and how has it evolved over the years?
So yes, that's a very interesting area, because just as the International Telegraph Union formed, which also looked amongst other things
Right,
at protection of telegraph traffic, at the difficulties, regulatory impediments that were put so that people wouldn't interrupt international telegraph traffic. So just like there were uh, uh, laws of international maritime trade that governed, not necessarily absolutely followed by everybody,
right.
but there were certain laws and customs which you followed. So the International Telegraph Union evolved and also led to what is called the
I think so.
no International Cable Protection Committee,
Okay.
which
Yes.
actually has it has about nearly above 230 members.
Right.
They are not only countries but companies also, and agencies. Now this is actually not a regulatory body, but it's a very important industry, business, and users body. It's actually quite different from other regulatory bodies in the sense it's voluntary, but China is a big player, of course, has a presence in that, and it it comes to various aspects of saying, this is something that is going to hurt a lot of people, so it's better we stop trying to hurt. Not that it's going to be an assurance, but at least it is something. Likewise, in the UN has a body. There are bilateral agreements on this. The quadrilateral is also doing a lot on cable technologies, cable protection, including training people
Right.
for maintaining cable infrastructure. And I feel that the quad itself is another area where uh, our four countries could, get together. The Australia, Japan, India, and the US could get together to form a kind of uh, a repair conglomerate, if you will, that is able to use repair facilities, repair capabilities far more efficiently. And the upside of it is what Quad is doing, as providing it as a public good. So trade itself, protection of trade, ultimately is a public good, whether it is physical trade by ships or digital trade mainly via undersea cables. And the point you made also of the satellites as an alternative sort of rings back to how radio took up some of the slack of split cables, not in any
Yeah.
way to the same degree, but people who will have a greater digital presence amidst challenges like this are likely to do better across a whole range of economic activities and across a whole range of combat activities also. And that is why I think protection of cables becomes vital both for economic assurance and for defensive assurance.
And cables, if I may also add, of course, we here the main focus of our discussions has been on internet cables and fiber
Yes.
optic cables. But these days, particularly with offshore wind farms, etc., power cables, gas pipelines, of course, are something much bigger. So there are many layers to this, I would presume, that would require to be sort of protected. I just thought I'd ask you also, would you like to dwell a little more on these, the importance from an economic perspective? I mean, between commodities and
Yeah.
and services trade. So I think the way, particularly India is swinging, is that by the latest stats, we are almost at par. I would say.
Yes. Yes, so I had the good opportunity of studying this, researching on this area for quite a few months in Australia, and you're right. India's digital trade today is coming to nearly what is often called services trade. Most of services trade is actually digital. It's in the ether,
Right.
or it's uh, all the conversations are actually going through water and yet avoiding trying to get wet and short circuited. So that digital trade is now about to cross 50%
Right.
of our trade, and that's a huge thing. So India's global presence in merchandise trade, both import and exports, and I include energy imports, energy exports, which are a huge percentage of ours, is itself, and a very minor percentage that is very high value, uh, quickly transportable air cargo. We are not a bit, we are
Right.
just a bit player on air cargo actually, but marine cargo trade is declining from almost 80% of our trade about 15 years ago to half of that. So the proportions are varying very rapidly. It is something that we do not quite realize,
Right.
but there are echoes of physical trade in digital trade also. As we see with what the Houthis are doing or any earlier
Right.
trade disruptions, ships can reroute, but cables are a bit difficult to reroute. Cable landing
Right.
stations are also, you can reassign ports to
Yeah.
ships, but you can't reassign cables to different cable landing
Landing
stations.
stations.
But in the
But you can
current,
reroute traffic. I
yeah,
mean, that
you
you
can
can.
you can reroute traffic, but
That.
rerouting traffic also provides some challenges,
Right.
because now the Chinese have really done more work perhaps than others, as far as I can understand, on what are called software defined networks. That means they are able to intercept and they're able to reroute traffic, others' traffic, without perhaps them coming to know, unless they have sophisticated technologies to do that. But then you are difficult to foil that. So that is the big challenge, and this is very important as we talk so easily these days about autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars, etc. What will happen is that the very minor delays that happen in terms of 100 milliseconds in signals being transmitted because of these
Right.
rerouting delays can actually create a whole lot of technological, perhaps even physical difficulties like accidents,
Right.
etc. So as the world is digitizing more and more, uh, all these aspects are actually mind-boggling. At one level, they are scary also. If we don't even know what can be done to us, and we now beginning to realize what can be done to us. So in this area, I mean, have you any idea what as a nation, in terms of that aspect of protection, we are probably working on?
So, I mean, many things. I think a lot of it we've already discussed, and let me very briefly recap because it will be largely, I would say, a summation of what we've been talking about. Firstly, undoubtedly, when it comes to undersea cables, more is better. The more cables we have, and the more redundancy it gives you, and along with more, better geographical spread is always advantageous. For any reason, they can be, because they can be natural causes also that cause disruptions, like a major earthquake or tsunami, etc., which can cause disruption. So therefore, if you have a wider spread geographically, a larger number of cables, certainly it is better. Second is cable repair. Now, if at all there is a disruption when it comes to cable repair, we don't have any capacity right now. What I think typically happens is that our cable operators, they normally contract, there are two large consortiums, one is Singapore based and one is Dubai based. And they have multi-year contracts with them, so that in case they have an incident, then they send a vessel to come and sort it out. But it's a complex process because firstly, that vessel has to be available. If the vessel is available, then there's a whole gamut of security clearances for for them to come, for the crew, etc. There is a requirement for a ministry official or government official to be on that ship while the cable repair is being carried out because of security reasons. So what one hears is that typically this process, which should normally take days, extends to several months. And the longer the disruption, the more the cost really that is which is associated with that. Apart from this regulatory framework that we have, that also has to be revisited, I would say. Cable repair ship, when it comes to a cable repair ship, I think ideally what should happen is some sort of a government private partnership, because these requirements are not, I wouldn't say few and far in between, but even if there are 3 or 4 incidents a year, to make sure that these are well utilized, it's best if government becomes a facilitator and private industry chips in and you form a consortium of some sort. And that ship can be made available to all our domestic cable operators to service their requirement. And if we have spare capacity, then you'll look at where you can get into the export requirement also and compete in due course of time with either these consortiums. So once we get past this, the next stage, of course, is cable laying. But I would say that is distant because cable laying is really few and far in between when you really need to lay a cable. In the interim, what we can also do is that the Navy, the Indian Navy, can also build up some capacities and capabilities for cable repair. Okay. Particularly, I would say on the diving support ships. We're commissioning these 2 large diving support ships, each are 6,000-7,000 tons. They all have, they both have got moon pools. They've got ROVs that you can operate. You've got dynamic positioning. So all the building blocks you require for a cable repair ship actually are there on that ship. If you have a containerized system, and you train basic small component of manpower to carry out this task, then they can complement whatever's coming up from Civvy Street side is fine, but the Navy can complement that effort. And we might have some classified requirements also, because as we get into the domain of undersea warfare, etc., you're going to lay out sensors, you're going to lay out for that, these also require cables to power them, to take signals out of them, etc. This is also going to become an increasing requirement going ahead. So therefore, I think it's useful for the Navy to sort of move up in this space. The other issue I would say is, of course, we've talked about space-based internet. That is, we can attempt to set up. I mean, these are expensive constellations that have to go up, but certainly if we can invest into some, as we are doing already with OneWeb, etc. And we are now, it's been coming in the news recently that Starlink has signed up both with Airtel as well as with Jio. So that's also another way to proceed. I think what we discussed also is that a stronger international and regional framework is beneficial. So maybe if we can partake in that effort for the current framework that exists dates back to the 19th century. It's not kept up with times, and therefore this responsibility. I mean, largely they say in peacetime. Firstly, I don't think it speaks much about wartime, but in peacetime, if there are any disruptions, it says that the state ship is responsible to prosecute. Yes. But if the state itself is party to it, then there's no question of prosecution at all. So that is another issue. And lastly, I would say is one more thing is that we have to have a plan that what happens if, okay, we might have redundancies, threefold, fourfold redundancies that you have, that in case you lose a cable or two, then you can sort of reroute traffic, of course, with the associated challenges you mentioned. But what happens if you have, cascading, I would say, failures of a large number of cables? What happens then? So I'm not too sure, but I don't think there is a provision that to identify what is critical traffic and make sure that you shed all the non-critical traffic, so that in whatever little capacity you have left, only the critical traffic flows, the financial traffic, government traffic, etc. Instead of streaming of Netflix movies, etc., all that, there has to be some sort of a prioritization that you can do and stop all that to make way for critical traffic. So these are the few points I had. So would you like to comment on any of these,
Yeah,
sir?
I think the last point is very interesting because I believe it's also the big challenge because it's like a road where a whole lot of users exist on that road, and to be able to ban a few is never easy. And we've seen now for security purposes whenever internet traffic etc. gets banned from time to time with good reason, actually a lot of other activities also come to a halt. So this kind of prioritizing and the technology that is required then to ensure that sphere A continues to have the data capability while sphere B is reduced to 50%
Yes.
and sphere C group of C users probably have just 5% or none. So that itself is a big challenge. And I absolutely agree that we have to participate much more in the international framework. But I would also suggest here is that in terms of data sovereignty and national ownership, we have similar challenges as in in shipping in terms of nationally registered ships, nationally owned ships,
Right.
and flags of convenience ships, which may be nationally owned but not not uh, not under total India's control. So all countries are trying to increase their national fleets. We notice now a lot of news about it from the US. Likewise, for data, they are in a better position because they just American companies own
Yes, sir.
most of the data and data providers, service providers. You mentioned Netflix, etc. Amazon, Netflix, Google, Meta,
Yeah.
etc. are the big providers and users. So they have already issues of owning sovereignty, whereas India is a big player, and I think we need to look at in whatever limited ways of more carefully considering challenges to and measures to enhance data sovereignty also as we go there, because you know data is the oxygen today. Sometimes uh, as a lay person, I may not realize that oxygen is depleting, but the moment data gets impacted,
You get
I
to know.
probably know in 2 minutes.
So that being said, sir, I think we've had an excellent discussion today. Bottom line is that whatever be the motivations of the Chinese, we have to be prepared. And the earlier we start, a lot being done already, but the earlier we sort of give a little more impetus to this effort, the better it's going to be for us in the long run. Remains to me once again to thank all our viewers for listening in. Delighted to have you with us, and look forward to seeing you again soon. And thank you again, sir, for already
Thank you
participating.
very much. Thank you.
Good luck. God bless.